All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, welcome back from that brief break. And thanks again to Diane for all of her thoughts today. We're going to move on to our next major item on the Policy Forum agenda. And if you thought it was complex just now, having one outstation and one moderator on stage, now we're going to have one moderator, two panelists on stage, and two moderators at separate outstations. So please join me in crossing your fingers and hoping for luck here. It is a real pleasure to bring you into our first topic of today's Policy Forum panel agenda, which is about moving from best practices to space traffic management rules. And what we're really trying to drill in on here is some of the specific actions taken in the various government agencies whose efforts have to come together under the adroit guidance of the National Space Council to deliver progress on space traffic management and space traffic coordination issues. So you've heard in bits and pieces about the progress made since the issuance of Space Policy Directive 3 and the Space Priorities Framework, but we're going to drill into that a bit more. We are joined today by a distinguished panel. So we have on your virtual screen first Richard DalBello, who is well known in this audience, and he is currently the Director of the Office of Space Commerce at the Department of Commerce. And Rich is, of course, a veteran of time in the White House and in various other policymaking roles, but he has now got the substantial challenge of delivering on the key steps that have been set out for the Department of Commerce in standing up the next steps on space traffic management. We're also joined virtually by Travis Langster at the Department of Defense. And Travis has a long history in commercial space situational awareness, but now is a principal director in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. So within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, thereby sort of setting the policy framework for all of the defense equities in the interagency and helping to provide guidance for the implementers. Speaking of implementers, I have on my left here on the stage one of the key implementers. That's Ms. Barbara Golf, who is the Senior Advisor, or Strategic Advisor, I guess, for Space Domain Awareness at Space Systems Command, part of the U.S. Space Force. And Barbara, looking forward to your thoughts. And you've been name-checked multiple times already today, so glad to have you. And then just to make clear that space traffic coordination doesn't begin or end in outer space, we actually have Travis traffic coordination that we have to manage today, because we have two Travises on this panel, or Travi, I don't know what the correct plural is. And I'm pleased to welcome Travis Blake, who is the Space Traffic Coordination Program Officer at NASA. NASA has these really cool job titles, like that one, or the Planetary Protection Officer. I need to consult with NASA about job titles and opportunities. So it's a really cool panel, and we're going to hit multiple agencies that are deeply engaged in this effort. Our hope is to have very much an open dialogue, and again, audience members, you are a part of that, so please feel free to throw your questions in the app. The sooner you do that, the better the chances of me being able to kind of coordinate it, make it cohere into a question narrative, but obviously I'm sure you want to hear what our panelists have to say. We have, let me just start with just the biggest picture question to the guy who has the rose pinned on him mostly to deliver. And Rich, can you talk about sort of what the OSC team is doing and what recent progress you've seen in terms of the so-called TRACS system? And if I can ask you, and you can do this either first or second, whichever you prefer, talk a little bit more about the long-term vision at the DOC level and into which TRACS fits.
Absolutely. And Jamie, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Great. Excellent. Well, I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'm actually only a few hundred feet away from you in my hotel room. I unfortunately got a little parting gift from the United Airlines when I arrived, which was COVID. So I think it's mostly past now, but I just felt uncomfortable being in the same location as all you good folks. So please excuse this somewhat bizarre location for this conversation. First of all, tremendously excited about both the TRACS program and the progress we've made and the relationships we're building. So when I started last year, or actually a little over a year and a half ago, there was almost no staff. So obviously you can't build a program if you don't have staff. And in the government, that means actual civil servants. It's a complicated process, but our goal is to, next year in 2024, is to have a staff of about 50. And that, right now, what we're building out is not only the technical staff, but also our operations team that will take over from the good work that's being done at the 18th and 19th today. So there will be separate TRACS operation centers and a primary and a backup. We haven't chosen those locations yet, but we're starting that staffing process. Also, if I can shamelessly use this great audience for an advertisement, we are going to be looking for a program manager for the TRACS program, as well as operations folks. So please keep your eye open on our website and on USA Jobs. Sandy Magnus, who's magnificent and is the current acting program manager, would rather be working as the chief engineer, and she'll be staying with us, but we'll be looking for a program manager. Staff is number one. Number two is, of course, budget. We didn't get our first budget until January of 23. We have, I think, made good use of that budget since. And I'll talk a little bit about that in detail. And then relationships, we couldn't be where we are without both DoD and NASA. And Travis can talk about DoD's role, but we're doing a lot of great work. And the primary issue we're focusing on is the transfer of data from DoD to the commerce system. We also have a fantastic relationship with NASA. NASA will be managing, Travis Blake can talk about that. We will be managing the R&D and the what we're calling our Pathfinder programs. The program will be rolled out in phases. The Congress asked us to deliver the first instantiation of this system by the fourth quarter of 2024. So we will be doing that. It will be, and we're going to roll it out in a series of phases. Phase one will start in Q4 2024, rolling to Q4 25, when we hope to have the whole system in place. And then we'll move on to phase two, which will be the launch COLA phase, and then phase three will follow that, where we'll look at the issue of reentry management. We're gonna just where we are from an acquisition perspective, we kind of have a slow track and a fast track. At the Department of Commerce, we're doing I call it the boring acquisition stuff. So we just recently awarded our cloud utility contract. The systems integrator contract will be next, and then finally the user interface. And while that contracting stuff is going on, Travis Blake and the NASA team are working with us to roll out a series of pathfinders. Those pathfinders will fund industry to do specific goals, tasks, to develop either to validate or develop tools that will then be part of the acquisition process. The first two pathfinders are improved owner-operator ephemerides, which we can discuss later if we have time, and mission planning, which is somewhat of a misnomer, but what we mean by that is that we'll be looking at how to harness commercial observations and commercial analytics to get higher fidelity information on secondary objects. So I think I've been talking a lot, so I'll be quiet and let my colleagues have a chance to talk, but great to see you all again.
That's super helpful, Rich, and particularly appreciate you laying out so clearly some of the coming milestones in this upcoming fiscal year. I think that'll help folks understand what is coming and what they can rely on there. the discussion around pathfinders as well, super helpful. And as I'm sure many of the folks here who are who've done technical modeling in this area would confirm, things like bringing in that highly reliable owner-operator data in a effective way will make a significant difference in our understanding of the domain. So that's terrific. Let me, you talked a lot about partnerships, Rich. Let me jump off of that. And Travis, do you have thoughts on the partnership side? Can you talk about how you expect the DoD to Office of Space Commerce relationship to develop over the coming couple of years as the mission continues to transition? And what is the end state? What does it look like at the end once the orbital safety mission has fully transitioned over to OSC?
Thanks for that question, Jamie. I first like to thank everyone for having the opportunity to participate also remotely. I must say it is a bit awkward wearing my Aloha shirt in the Pentagon, so I'll be taking it off afterwards. But to your specific question, yeah, Rich and I, as soon as he got in his office, we've been partnering ever since. We were having just about weekly calls. We took a joint visit out to Vandenberg to see the folks who are managing the spaceflight safety today. But beyond that, we continue to work on this together. And from a DoD perspective, you know, this transfer of responsibility is an opportunity to ensure that DoD is devoting most of its energy and precious resources to inherently military missions that the DoD has to perform, such as threat identification, assessment and protection, and defense of high-value assets. It's also a golden opportunity to transition away from DoD's legacy systems and to modernize the architecture, the processing, and information provided to meet the needs of the new dynamic that's happening in space. But that partnering also consists of not just the mission or data transfer, but the knowledge transfer. The DoD is honestly, over the years, built up a level of expertise. There's lots of national treasures between the 18th and 19th Space Defense Force in managing with the tools and capabilities that they have at their disposal. And so we want to make sure that Commerce is able to leverage that experience, including what worked well and what didn't work well. And to the end state, that was one of the first things that Rich DalBello and I did work on together, is kind of where we'd like to be. And it's a very brief document, but it really does have the sentiment of being able to, DoD focused on the inherently military missions, and Department of Commerce employing commercial tools and software for analysis and verification tasks, and doing that in a way that the system is utilizing government tools and software only when not available commercially. So being able to harness the innovation that exists today within industry.
That's helpful, Travis. And let me turn to your colleague in the Department of Defense, Barb, from Space Systems Command. And Barb, can you talk a little bit about the organization you're associated with, and maybe the broader Space Force, to the extent that's appropriate, in terms of how you're thinking about the exchange of data at a practical level, and the reliance, the reliance that the Department of Defense and Space Force might intend to make on what Department of Commerce is contracting for and producing.
Yes, sure. Com check. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So that's my boss, so I agree with what he says. So, but the core of it is the U.S. military will be focused on threats. DOC will be focused in on hazards. So you can divide this up into, they'll be handling everything that's cooperative, everything that is what we call non-cooperative. It can't help. And the DoD will be focused on everything that's actively uncooperative. It won't help. We highly recommend you be on the DOC screens, by the way. So Other ways that we'll be interacting is, one of the reasons I'm part of the team is because of the Joint Commercial Operations Cell. We have, in our third tribe, been able to successfully begin to incorporate commercial SDA analytics and data into our operations, and so we have a lot of scar tissue about how to do that. And so fully supportive of the initiatives to make sure that we're bringing commercial capabilities and their innovation into space traffic coordination. The way the DoD has done it in the past is not necessarily the best way to do this in the future as we look at space traffic coordination as a new mission. We will still continue to support from military space flight safety. You'd have to pry the safety of SIBRs out of our cold, dead fingers, honestly. But we will look at how to continue to do that cooperatively with our partners, and then help look at how to incorporate the commercial data into both parts of the architecture. We're already doing that nascently on the DoD side, and we can help learn how to do that at a crawl, walk, run for the DOC.
Can you say a little bit more about those lessons learned from incorporation of commercials? So what were the strengths and weaknesses, and what concretely are you doing to be more capable of taking that information in and in a way that's helpful?
Sure, no problem. So a couple parts there. So I mentioned very briefly, we've done this 3 times. We're on our 3rd version of a commercial operations cell at least. A couple things that we learned from our earlier failures. A lot of folks focus on what's the best one. The answer is there is no best. It all depends on where you are, what orbit you're in, what the algorithms have been tuned for, and everyone's got their own kind of niche expertise. The DoD isn't the best. We have the most, but that's not always the best. And so as we look at this, we shouldn't be afraid to have more, not less. There is no gold standard. We are in a cyber environment. Anything can be hacked at any time, and everything will at one point in time. So as you look at this, how do you bring in the crowdsourced version of the data? That's something that was a key success of the Joint Commercial Operations Cell is we don't have a single point of failure anywhere. We try to bring in as much as possible. We look at both precision and accuracy. We're doing that in near real time at all times. And so that's one of the lessons we would want to offer is don't come down into a single answer. There is no single one. And always, always have the ability to tactically shift out based on both not only technical performance, but operational performance. So you don't want to be vendor locked to just one for a long duration of time. You do want to shift things out. Perhaps not so quickly as we do on the DoD side right now. We are in the tizzy of 1-month contracts, and we would really like to get out of that business. Probably more like 6 months at a time is what we're aiming for. But that ability to shift things out to make sure folks are always moving forward, and that you're able to change things into the next best, the next better thing that you have, is what has worked really well in this 3rd iteration of operations.
That's very helpful. And, Dr. Janet Wolfson last night at the Women and Allies event had some wonderful remarks, and one of the words she wanted us to take out of our vocabularies or phrases was ground truth. I'm struck that ground truth, or whatever we replace it with in space dialogue, is one of the hardest things to get for the space situational awareness, space domain awareness missions, because certainly for conjunction assessment, you don't really know the true positions except when you have not just a conjunction, but a collision, right? They're all probabilistic and predictions. I really like the aspect here where you're getting out of no one best, but rather kind of a robust assembly of multiple sources. That also gets to the resiliency concepts that come through loud and clear in the policy guidance that Travis's team has been putting out. So thank you for that. Let me look to the other of our 2 travi here and say, first, I hope we can get a commitment from the stage here that NASA will consult with Rich DalBello on the title for the job he's recruiting for. I think you guys could help there. But then, secondly, how do you see NASA playing into this? Obviously, NASA's got huge equities in space safety. but also a huge amount of insight to bring to the table. Can you kind of give us a quick summary of how you guys are approaching the issue?
Oh, sure. Thanks very much. I am known as the Lester Travis for obvious reasons. It's great to be back on the stage here. I was away for quite a bit, but all that passion for commercial that we had before, still there. I'll let you know how we're kind of doing that here and building off all the lessons that we're learning from our DoD partners. So let me first say that I've been to NASA. I worked with NASA, but I really didn't know NASA until January of this year. I still don't know NASA 9 months later. It is a large organization with lots of equities, so I will not speak on behalf of the entire agency. I will turn that over to my boss's boss's boss, Ms. Melroy, when she was able to answer that question. I will say that, from a larger perspective of safe and sustainable operations, of course, NASA, I would argue, might have the biggest equity in space with the International Space Station. They have a long history of protecting human spaceflight. We have an outstanding history of protecting our science missions through the NASA CARA program. So we have lots of experience when it comes to NASA side of things. One of the things that when I was brought in, Rich kind of asked, how can NASA help us here? One of the things that we've kind of settled on is NASA can help. He mentioned the studies and Pathfinder, so taking the experience that NASA has, the expertise that's around NASA, and trying to scope out what are the bounding edges for this space and sustainable problem. I kid Barb that we have edges. We can kind of find how good is a good enough covariance to generally do space traffic coordination. You have an unbounded problem, right? There is no kind of bounds to protect and defend. What that means is that it makes our job for acquisitions and things a little bit easier. And we can kind of say, okay, well, we need this, right? This much gets us to this point, which is at least initially where we want to be, right? It's not an open-ended problem. So NASA has some expertise for what it's done, and we had some existing contracts, so we put a lot of that stuff into place. Those are the studies we're kind of doing. How good do we need to be on covariance? Where is that kind of knee in the curve? Although I was told yesterday there is no knee, you just kind of cut off where you think you need to be. The other thing we have is we have some rather rapid acquisition vehicles. So we are going to put in some Pathfinders to kind of understand what we can do with commercial. Some of you might have seen that we released an RFI for a development environment on the NASA SOUP program. We will be turning that around into an RFP here within the next few weeks. That gets us, what did you call it? The tactical environment. We are learning the lessons. I don't personally like to use the term vendor lock. I tend to look at it as best value for the American taxpayer. If you're a vendor and you are not performing for whatever reason, I want the flexibility to find a vendor who is able to perform that mission better, cheaper, spur innovation. So we are, trying to look to see what we can do to foster competition and be able to have flexibility in the government. What's nice here is that, we have a model where we're starting over here. So we do not have a lot of the legacy. It's one of those things is that we have this beautiful cloud computing, and we can start with that from the beginning. So let's take advantage of that. And then we're going to be working on services. So, my time in venture capital taught me that commercial is a capital C commercial. We're looking to buy not just data, but services. And we want those services to be commercial. But let me emphasize capital C commercial. What we want is products that you are selling, others are using, that are not inside the United States government. That is commercial, right? Those are the things that we're after. So this is kind of a two-way street here. If you come in and said, hey, I have this great effort and program, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, okay, who's using it? Because if nobody else is using it, then it's not really commercial. It's just a capability that might meet our need. So we're trying to do true commercial. We're also piggybacking. This job is so easy because Barb made it easy, right? We are looking at the global data marketplace that was set up and kind of pioneered through the DoD efforts. We're going to pile right onto that and see how that works for us. And then lastly, what we're going to do is the longer term R&D. So when Rich mentioned, those longer term phases, how do we do launch COLA? How do we do reentry management? How do we incorporate AI or ML in order to help out our operators and do other things? We are setting up a process inside NASA with a joint NASA-NOAA Commerce Advisory Board to help us do and decide which R&D things that we should do into the future, and all that is being funded by the Department of Commerce. So we kind of have those three, kind of a couple near-term things and some longer-term R&D activities. I do have to say very clearly that all of the system integrator work, those RFIs you've seen coming from the Office of Space Commerce, that's not me, right? I have no responsibility for that. I don't review those. So the operational OASIS part of tracks is being done by the Office of Space Commerce. So please do not get the R&D horizon development environment we're putting into place to support the Pathfinders and research and development with that operational environment, right? That is over to Rich and Sandy and the to-be-named program manager who will have the coolest sounding job title ever as soon as we figure out what that is. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Travis. Jumping off your latter discussion there on R&D and coming back to the broader space sustainability issues that Diane brought up at the end of her remarks, how is NASA thinking about research and development against that broader sustainability problem, of which obviously good space traffic coordination is a critical contributor, but it's only one of many pieces that come together for sustainability?
Yeah, what I've initially told Office of Space Commerce when I first got there is I think the funding that we get from the Office of Space Commerce to NASA that we execute on their behalf and through their advisement is kind of the little r, big D. Right, we're looking more for things that can be higher TRL, that can be developed, that can be driven into near-term next phases for work, right? Not necessarily the lowest TRL, newest kind of things. There are research dollars. We're looking at how NASA does that support for kind of a bigger research mission. We do have work within STMD. I have colleagues within this Science Mission Directorate that have funding that do some R&D work. We have SBIRS programs to be able to do that. Looking about how we do that focus in order to do kind of the big R part of things. I recently sent out an email trying to get a little bit better loose coordination between all of the SSA, STC, STM, space sustainability researchers within the United States to be able to kind of coordinate those activities. That if somebody, if Dr. Williams starts something at AFOSR, how do we then transition that so maybe we within the Office of Space Commerce support are able to take that, and then most importantly, I think between our development environment and the JCO, we now have what this community has been missing for a long time, which are evaluation for those R&D, right? I am a clone of Barb, right? Don't tell me, show me, right? When you get done with this, you got to show me how it works before we start transition. But we will have that transition built in so that if it's successful, we want you to get through a certain path to get this into operations. Okay. So there is a role for NASA outside of that, and we are looking about how to arrange that.
I think that sort of crowdsourcing piece is important. I'm actually curious, how many people in the audience here received that email?
Oh no, I know exactly who's on that email.
Okay.
It's Barb.
So here's the next question.
It is government people for right now, right? We need to internally work how we're going to do this so that we understand how it will be, and then we'll reach out to our other partners, international and others first.
Got it. So let me ask then, following on to that, since we saw the pie chart yesterday of the audience by distribution, and we got a lot of government here. How many people in the government should have got that email in your own personal assessment? Well, perfect. You covered everybody you need to. Brilliant. I think the point here, of course, is it's an extraordinarily complex enterprise, and we see that just among the panel here. But it is, I think every year we see the stakeholder pool growing dramatically. And so speaking of the stakeholder pool growing dramatically, that's the world that Rich is living in. Rich, can you talk a little bit, and this is one of the first of our questions in from the audience, talk about how you guys at Commerce are thinking about commercial and the capital C commercial part that Travis just mentioned. So a demand signal for a product which is coming not just from the government, as we did with commercial space launch and commercial delivery to station and so forth, but capital C commercial where there's real enduring commercial buyers. And what role do you think the government should play in incentivizing an SST observation economy, which the questioner refers to as paying for raw observations, versus a proliferation of independent orbital determination solutions? So easy softball there, Rich.
There's an awful lot to unpack there. let me, if I could just start with making a comment about what you were just talking about, which is the international environment and the broader issue of space sustainability. Space sustainability means a lot of things to a lot of different people. At the policy level, there's a tremendous amount of work that's going on both at the UN and later this year at the World Radio Conference in Dubai. And there is a focus, a general world focus on how are we managing large constellations going into the future. So at the UN level, there's been a substantial dialogue among nations on the topic of long-term sustainability. Specific guidelines are being discussed. What I see our work as being is actually taking those principles and grounding them in the reality of spaceflight. So we are where those principles meet their application. And so that's a dialogue that we're having within the US government, but also broadly with our allies. And there's tremendous interest globally in this topic. And it's something that we do spend a fair amount of resource on and want to spend more on. We have a team that does focus on international, and it's something that we intend to, working closely with our colleagues at State Department, it's something that we intend to play a bigger role on. To turn to your question about commercial, it is probably the most complicated part of the job. We were given many directives. Travis referred to it briefly, but don't encourage the industry, but don't do vendor lock. Provide a safety service, but don't compete with the industry. There's a lot of potentially conflicting parameters in what we're doing. What we're trying to do is say, we want to rely to the maximum extent possible on the tools that the commercial industry has developed. And we are hopeful, as Travis just referred to, that those tools are grounded not just in our purchasing, but also in an actual commercial marketplace. We do understand that when the government enters a marketplace, that it warps that marketplace. So we're going to be coming into the marketplace with a fair amount of dollars. And so there will be some, I think, commercial reaction to that. The global SSA market is at its beginning, in part because currently satellite operators are not compelled by anything other than common sense to pay attention to SSA. So I could imagine a future world where that were different and there were more direct regulation of the industry, and that may eventually turn out to be true as we move into the next generation of space traffic. But today, these things are merely safety advisories, sort of like weather reports, if you will, rather than a direction, a mandate from the FAA on air traffic safety. So one of the things we're doing with the Pathfinders is trying to understand how to price the elements which are in the marketplace. There are, of course, commercial observations. What is an observation worth? And these are things where I think we have the sort of where we are now in the dialogue is understanding how does our budget match with our aspirations for providing the kinds of coverage that we'd like. And a lot of that will depend on the pathfinders to determine where is the market price, because there isn't today a robust enough market that price is obvious. So we have a lot of work to do, both directly with the operators and with our international colleagues who are building similar systems to understand how to do that. We wish to be supportive of industry. As Travis mentioned, we are hoping that industry is bigger than our purchasing.
Very much, Rich. Do you want to jump in, Barbara?
So I just wanted to pile on that. One of the things as I'm supporting this transition that I'm very concerned about is if we end up picking a side in industries. I don't want us looking at something and saying, you know, the on-orbit satellite industry is more important than the growth of the SDA sensors and analytics industry. That's too short-sighted. The government shouldn't be picking a side with industries. What I'm really hoping that we focus on is what is the bare minimum required for spaceflight safety, so that the government isn't involved more than it has to be, and enables space for commercial innovation. This enables all industries to then grow into that space. It prevents wasteful spending of national taxpayer resources, subsidizing one part of a market over another. So we're not here to give anybody a free ride. We're trying to figure out what's the right way to be safe in the global commons without overrunning or destroying any aspect of that global commons, like we did, for example, with weather, space weather in particular. We don't want to be short-sighted here, and so we need those voices from our industry partners to make sure that we're doing this right. We do not want to be optimized for only today. We have problems coming up in the future very quickly. If we don't have a robust commercial SDA and analytics industry, we're not going to do very well when we go beyond GEO. And we're already headed back out there. The US government's terrible in LEO and XGEO. That's just a fact. So how do we're going to need help in order to start closing some of these gaps. XGEO is a critical one. Who's going to help us provide the data and analytics for tomorrow's challenges if we have gutted one industry at the expense of the other? And so I very much agree with the balancing that we have to do, and we need that feedback.
So I want to pull on a point there a little bit and make sure we're understanding clearly. Sometimes people set things up as, hey, there's a tension. Is the government interested in purchasing really high quality commercial SSA data or models, vice the quality of the basic service that's going to be provided? And I think what I'm hearing you say is that there can be a delta between those, and the government could buy extensive and exquisite and then turn around and use a portion of that to provide what is a basic service to avoid crowding out commercial innovation in providing advanced services.
I think you've exactly hit it. The operations teams are going to be focused on getting the best. Again, there's no single best, but getting that spread of the crowd that is meeting our needs. But what's provided for free? What is the basic service? What is the minimum requirement for safety in this global commons? That is a very challenging question. And just because the US government and others are buying it in order to support the operations does not mean it's delivered to the world to undermine the markets.
Okay. I think that's it.
And if I could add, Jamie, we're not in this alone. I mean, EUSST, the European SSA provider, who we have many productive conversations with, is the first of what will be a proliferation of international SSA systems. So the US is going to make these decisions about safety level, but other countries and organizations will be making similar sets of decisions. So part of what we are doing is having to keep an eye on where development is going around the world, because we don't want to compete with the commercial sector. We want to offer only a basic safety service, but we have to be on par with all of our international colleagues. So it's kind of a delicate dance that we're going to be doing for many years.
Important point there. And obviously one in which the standards might not be static forever. The level of basic safety service that's acceptable in a world with, X thousand satellites may not be acceptable in a world with 10X thousand satellites or 100X thousand satellites. And on our current geometric progression, we could be there. Let me flip now absolutely into that international issue that Richard was just starting us down. We have some questions from the audience getting at the perspective of allies and partner countries around the world that are also working on space domain awareness strategies, also working on space cyber protection strategies, and are interested in understanding how best to ensure interoperability and how to leverage the strength of global relationships that the U.S. has and that the like-minded nations bring together. So let me start with our DoD folks on that. I'll start with you if I can, Travis L., and then open it to others as well.
Yeah, so, there are three priorities that we have within our space policy realm. And the first one really is space cooperation. And so we put a premium on finding ways to, we have international engagements, bilateral engagements, we have multilateral fora as well. And we're working towards identifying where can we not only leverage, but where can we integrate our international allies and partners into DoD missions to really achieve that strategic advantage and integrated deterrence through all of our policy guidance that says that not only on the international side, but also on the commercial side, where can we plug in commercial to, where can we integrate commercial as part of DoD missions and architectures for the same reason, being able to increase resilience, integrated deterrence. So international engagement, space cooperation, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a specific capability, a creative idea, innovation, geography, whatever the case may be, but we have to have that engagement and understanding to really fully appreciate what a partner could bring to this mission area.
Thank you. Barbara?
Just to pile on that, some specific examples. So we will be standing up 24/5, so that's Monday through Friday, operations in our international JCO Global, Joint Commercial Operations Cell in its global version on the 4th of October this year. These are examples of our command and controllers across the globe. So we have Australia, Canada, Brazil, France, Britain, Israel, NATO, New Zealand, Poland, Ukraine, all trained for command and control operations on this floor globally. Other teams that are actually involved, Australian Space Agency actually has a member who is being trained to be part of the command and control, leaning forward to learn what civil space traffic coordination interactions will look like with a military spaceflight safety team. So folks are welcome to join us. We're already starting. We already have these sorts of international activities going on with commercial, and there's a lot of opportunity to learn.
Thank you. I will say that's the first time I've ever heard the expression 24/5.
I'll get to Saturday and Sunday eventually.
Okay, and that's Saturday and Sunday, which side of the international date line?
I'm with you.
Okay. But a very important step. That's great to hear. Let me, Travis brought up integrated deterrence, and I think that's a super important point, and you brought up Ukraine. One of the things that I think everybody who was watching the geopolitical situation in the run-up to the war in Ukraine realized is that the provision of space-based insight, not just from the U.S. choosing to release National Reconnaissance Office insight to the public, but from a wide variety of sensor providers, companies around the world, other governments, really helped to undermine the global effect of disinformation. You know, as Russia extended their invasion of Ukraine, they had an active disinformation campaign, and it was largely nerfed by this combined set of information being laid on the table, which I'm sure did not happen by accident, right, and required a lot of hard work. I'm struck that the partnered SSA approach and the combined and commercially informed SSA approach actually puts us in a much stronger position than we could have otherwise been with regard to diffusing any disinformation campaigns about future tensions that might arise in space. Can I ask, Travis, your thoughts on that? And do you see that as an important feature that helps to underscore the approach you're taking? Or?
Absolutely. It provides, by being able to leverage the non-government assets, leveraging the commercial, because it's not classified or in some cases not subject to classification, provides the ability to attribute all those things that we were seeing, the buildup and ultimate invasion. The same applies in space situation awareness, space domain awareness. Department, my office, we've been conducting a series of industry engagements alongside government stakeholders. And we've done tabletop exercises that go through some interesting scenarios from a space perspective. And one of the fundamental learnings that we're getting out of this is information sharing, two-way information sharing. When there's a threat in space, that usually means there's something on the ground taking place as well. So information sharing is foundational, and being able to understand the domain from both sides, the commercial as well as the DoD, NASA, commerce, we're all operators of the domain, and being able to have a good assessment, being able to characterize something that can be explained, something that can be attributed to a specific action is to the benefit of all of us.
Okay, thank you there.
Jamie, can I jump in on that one?
Of course.
So my office, in addition to doing tracks, also is the regulator for the commercial remote sensing industry. And I think that the partnership that we've had with industry and with the national security establishment has been amazing. And in the last couple of months, we have done the largest deregulation of the industry since it got started. We removed over 40 restrictions on the licenses that exist. And I think that's in the midst of this dynamic international environment, the relationship that we have with the defense and intelligence community and the dialogue with industry has allowed us to safely move forward, allow the industry to be competitive while taking care of the core interests of the United States. And I think it's an amazing partnership and amazing success. And I think that everything you just said about Ukraine demonstrates why it's an amazing success. And I think that is the power of a good partnership between the industry and government. I just wanted to flag that.
No, it's an important point, Rich, and you unfortunately walked directly into the pending question from the distinguished Dr. Brian Whedon, which is really to both you and Travis B. as our civil agency folks. You know, so when we started down this process of taking in commercial SSA and thinking about a long term of a path to what became SPD3 and where we are today, there was a lot of concern from the national security community about protection of information, controlling information about space activities. I have a sense, I spent a lot of my time in the national security community, I have a sense of how they're feeling about it, but I'm interested, how does it look on your end? How does it look on your end, Rich? Have those attitudes fundamentally shifted, or is the national security community recognizing the domain is increasingly transparent? Or is
I think that we have a very similar situation that we had with commercial remote sensing, where it's easy to look at commercial remote sensing and say, oh my God, all these commercial people are going to see all this important stuff ship movement, troop preparation. That raises concerns for me. And then the question is, how do we deal with that concern? I think in the space environment, we're seeing the same reaction initially, which is when the skies are clear, adversaries could potentially have a lot more information than we would be comfortable with them having. And I think what we'll see is the same arc where we identify issues, discuss them, have a dialogue with industry, if necessary, put in place certain restrictions, but overall the trend will be towards openness. And it will be a trend towards openness for the same reason it was in remote sensing, because we don't control the world. That there are a lot of actors out there, just as there were in the remote sensing, where there are a lot of developments which are going to happen internationally, where the momentum is going to take us forward into this uncertain space. And I think we can manage it. Working with Travis Langster's team, we can manage these problems as they come up with the same level-headed approach that we use with remote sensing.
Yep. No, thanks. So I'll kind of echo a little bit what Rich said and add a little bit more. So the first off, I think there's always been the ability for others than the United States to track things in space that do not show up in the open catalogs from the United States. The difference now is that is being propagated and multiplied around the world, right? So, there was certain places that those ended up, but it wasn't all over the place. Now it's all over the place. So you do have this kind of, I would say the same thing that drives other industry regulations. Well, if everybody else is doing it, how can we not do it, right? We're only hampering our commercial companies. The other thing I'll say is that for my brief time in the White House, I was a military officer. I was believing that, our first line of national security is our defense, right? Our military is the first line of national security. I changed that thinking. Our first line of national security, in Travis's opinion, the lesser Travis's opinion, is economic, right? Our economy is our first line of national defense and what we can do with that economic. We've seen that in Ukraine with sanctions and other things. So when we talk about these kind of, data protection for national security, one of the things that has come a little bit more to the forefront is that balancing of, economic security versus military security when it comes to that national security, right? There is more than just military. It is, was it diplomatic, informational, military, economic? So you have to balance that economic one. If you look at now, our assets, which drive significant economic advantage for the United States, are in space. And they are now under threat from more of the environmental aspects than they are adversarial aspects. So when you start to look at, okay, well, how do we protect that? Well, I would say, well, how do you make it more open? Because, what is my greatest threat to some of these commercial systems in space? It's not necessarily an adversary. It is, the environment itself. And those data can't be protected such that I can't provide the safety mission for those assets in the space. So I think the balance there is kind of shifted given the environment and the growth in the economy.
Parv, I get the sense you might like to jump in on this point.
We gave it away. Commercial data is not classified. So we've been doing this in the JCO for 4 years now. We need to grow up. So commercial data is not classified. We will look at the DoD data that is sent over to the DOC in order to seed and support, say, spaceflight safety. We are working to get the high accuracy catalog released to the DOC machine to machine starting in the spring of next year, every 4 hours indefinitely. So they will have everything they need in order to be seeded for spaceflight safety. They can then augment with commercial data, and commercial processing is not classified. It does not matter that the DoD wishes it were. We're over it. And I find it funny that the most tempered reaction is from the DOC. It's not from the DoD. We're over it. This has been our operations floor. This is an operations floor that is now expanding to support with commercial space capabilities for 11 unified combatant commands, not just U.S. Space Command. And we're over it. So we're going to get you what you need for spaceflight safety. We're going to do that without impacting a commercial market as much as possible. But you're going to get what you need. And antiquated legacy policies that are tied to restricting capabilities that are over 50 years old are irrelevant.
Okay. So we are almost at the end of this panel's slot here. I wanted to ask the members of the panel real briefly, because we have an audience here that is diverse, right? We've got academics doing fundamental research. We've got business development people for companies that want to sell to the government, and everything in between. One of the challenges with the shift to more commercial sourcing in the SSA environment, as with many other areas relative to government, is that the traditional means of communicating between government and sort of wholly owned industry about future requirements and roadmaps and goals kind of break down, right? It's harder to communicate in such a way when you're not paying for the basic research and you're not paying for the research and development, you just want to buy a service. If I can ask each of you, what would you want to say to the early stage people in academia and the kind of middle stage people doing product ideation and development in commercial industry, where you see government needs coming down the road? And Rich, you've got components and tracks that are expressly designed to do that. Do you want to start us, and we'll go quickly through the group?
I know our time is short, but I just wanted to say that we knew communication was going to be an issue from the beginning of this program. And so we set out, first of all, if you're curious about anything that I said, if you go online to the Office of Space Commerce, there's like a 20-minute video there where Sandy Magnus walks through the entire program, including the acquisition strategy and approach and timing on everything. So it's all online. And I think our goal in our community, we've done a number of open sessions with industry. I think we met with over 100 people about 6 months ago in workshop sessions. We are going to strive to be as open as we possibly can, subject to the laws of the United States about acquisition. So we are going to make this a top priority, is communicating what we're trying to do and where we are in the process. So if you wonder what's going on, please just check our social media, check our Office of Space Commerce page. We'll probably be standing up a separate tracks program page in the future, although we don't have that up yet. So I just wanted to say that we're committed to communication. It should be easy for you to find out what's going on with the tracks program. We're incredibly interested, and we have these different portals. So we have Travis Blake's work stands closely aligned with everything we're doing, but he's an independent sounding board for different kinds of research and development ideas. And so please do talk to Travis separately, but we are committed to trying to be as open as possible in the implementation of this program.
Let me go to Travis Blake, and then...
Yeah, thanks, Rich. You should have done everything but get out my email address. Now that everybody's going to come. Yep. I would say from the R&D perspective, I mentioned that we're going to be having, kind of a little bit more traditional calls for things that we need to have. We will be issuing things on marketplaces, so you'll be able to see what we need to support the Office of Space Commerce going into the future. It's important to note, though, it is directly, Rich will be the authority about what research that we do, right? It's his dollars, he will decide, we will recommend. And then we will make that known to the community. We want to have academic engagement, industry engagement, so what we should be working on, what's available. We're going to kind of structure all that together. The last thing I will note, though, is that kind of going back to we want this to be a robust commercial capital C market. The government cannot do that by itself, right? We have seen examples. We can spur this, but This goes all to those commercial owner-operators out there. We need you to support this market as well, right? You need to take the data that, Barb's going to be able to make available through us, that we're going to work with small companies. You have to also engage with these small companies to do business analytics, to do revenue-generating things for you that go beyond flight safety. Because without that, these companies have nothing to sell into, right? So we need the commercial owner-operators to engage with that as well. No clapping, but I'm sure everybody's agreeing with that, right? So take a look at that, right? So if you are one of those owner-operators, take a look at what you can do to support this commercial marketplace, not just the government.
Okay. And then Barb and then Travis L., you guys are both consumers of these services as well. Quickly, what do you think are the...
Sure. So we make a lot of our requirements known through things like a couple different venues. So Space Systems Command front door, the Commercial Space Office. Another one is we run the Sprint Advanced Concept Training events, which are live practice forums in our unclassified virtual operations floor 2 to 3 times a year. So there's a lot of different ways where you can see what's happening. It doesn't all have to be papers and PowerPoint. You can watch the collapse of different activities in live operations and then figure out what you're going to do to fill the gap. So a lot of different opportunities there, and we will be looking at Trax Horizons as well as far as different things coming in the door that we can leverage.
And what I'm hearing you say is if anybody wants to join in those activities, they just email Travis?
Exactly right. They go to him. No, no, we know we have the SSE front door and the Commercial Space Office as well.
So and
yes.
the
That's travis.langster@dod.mil.
Mr. Langster, you get to close us out here.
All right. Well, unlike my other panelists, in policy, we don't have contracts or requirements, but what we can do and are doing is ensuring that we're working with across all the DoD elements to understand what needs to be prioritized to better integrate commercial systems, to incentivize commercial sector companies for us to build strong, mutually beneficial partnerships across the department to be able to deploy and employ, those capabilities that are out there. And as a part of that, part of it also is ensuring that the department, the inertia that we've built up over the last several decades and the associated structural and cultural barriers that we get rid of that such that we can better leverage commercial. So that's what policy can do. And we've been, I mentioned earlier, we've set up a series of engagements with industry, and we're going to continue to do so. And it's not just for the sake of doing so, but it will have a in purpose and objective, and something that we'll be able to get after in terms of prioritizing commercial within the DoD mission set.
All right. Well, thank you to all of the panelists and to the audience for the excellent questions. This is a fast-moving thing. NASA doesn't get to do decadals on this. We got to do like 6-monthicals. And we're going to, I think, learn more next year and hopefully do a lot more in the intervening year toward that aggressive timeline that Rich has laid out. So thank you all, and we look forward to continuing the conversation tomorrow.